Donald Trump says he doesn't want to see you at all at APEC. Has the Canadian government given any consideration to the possibility that he doesn't want to negotiate, and do you have a contingency plan for that?
We have yes. The short answer is yes.
Mark Carney didn't raise his voice or strike back. Standing before reporters in Kuala Lumpur, the Canadian Prime Minister responded to Donald Trump's latest outburst with quiet precision.
Obvious plan that is there in plain sight and will be further detailed in the budget on November 4th. And we have been saying this for months. I said this before I was elected. Emphasize the importance of us giving ourselves far more than any foreign government could take away, whatever the trading environment. And that's to build at home and to build strong at home.
Trump had just halted all trade talks with Canada after an Ontario television ad mocked his tariff policy. While Washington erupted in anger, Carney answered with a steady message. Canada would stay focused, build at home, and strengthen its global partnerships. It was a moment of contrast, emotion against restraint, reaction against reason. For Trump, the dispute was personal. For Carney, it was structural. He framed the pause in negotiations not as a loss, but as a reminder that leadership is measured by composure, not noise. That calm reply didn't just defuse confrontation, it marked the start of a larger shift, turning an American tantrum into an opening for Canadian independence. Carney's team had been close to a breakthrough. Officials on both sides were exchanging draft agreements aimed at easing U.S. tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum. Then, just as progress appeared within reach, the Ontario ad went on air across American networks. Trump reacted instantly. Negotiations were suspended and another 10% tariff on Canadian goods was threatened. He made no secret of his anger. Reporters asked Carney if he blamed Ontario's Premier Doug Ford for the setback. The Prime Minister didn't take the bait. Instead, he reminded the press that big negotiations often take unexpected turns, and that losing one round doesn't mean losing the game. His tone was deliberate, the opposite of Trump's. Where the U.S. president turned emotional, Carney turned strategic. By staying calm, he was signaling to both Washington and the Canadian public that Ottawa would not be dragged into a shouting match. Behind that calm surface, something larger was already taking shape. Canada was beginning to redefine how it would deal with the world. During his media appearance, Carney repeated a phrase that summed up his entire economic vision. Canada must give itself more than any foreign government could ever take away. It was more than political reassurance, it was the outline of a national strategy, a plan to rebuild Canada's industrial base and shield it from unpredictable trade shocks. Carney revealed that his government would soon unleash hundreds of billions of dollars of investment at home, with details to be presented in the federal budget on November 4. This was not rhetoric, it was a clear signal that Canada would respond to trade aggression not with retaliation, but with reconstruction. In practice, this meant new funds for manufacturing, technology, and energy projects designed to make Canadian supply chains self-sufficient. Ottawa's approach contrasted sharply with Washington's. Trump used tariffs to punish competitors. Carney used investment to strengthen domestic capacity. The symbolism mattered. The U.S. tried to close doors. Canada began building its own foundation. What looked like an economic setback became the start of a national reset. Carney's speech also revealed how deeply he understands the structure of North American trade. At one point, he pointed to aluminum, a product few outside the industry pay attention to, yet central to U.S. manufacturing. Canada supplies about 60% of the aluminum used by American factories. That metal is produced mostly using clean hydroelectric power from Quebec, which Carney said carries the energy equivalent of 10 Hoover dams. In other words, the U.S. benefits enormously by importing aluminum from Canada rather than producing it with its own fossil fuel electricity. By cutting off that supply, Trump's tariffs risk raising costs for American automakers, airplane builders, and construction companies, all industries that depend on Canadian inputs. Carney's point was clear. The U.S. and Canada are not rivals in this equation. They are two sides of the same industrial system. By targeting Canada, Trump was in effect taxing his own supply chain. This quiet economic logic cut deeper than any political statement could. It showed that leadership isn't about volume or emotion. It's about understanding how the system really works and knowing when to let the numbers speak for themselves. As tensions with Washington rose, Carney's focus shifted eastward. In Kuala Lumpur, he met Malaysia's Prime Minister, Anwar Ibrahim, his fourth ASEAN leader in just a few days. From there, he moved on to Singapore for meetings with business leaders before heading to South Korea for the APEC Summit. While Trump was threatening new tariffs on allies, Carney was welcomed across Asia as a partner who valued stability. At the ASEAN Summit, he announced that Canada aims to increase non-U.S. exports by 50% over the next decade, about $300 billion as part of its Indo-Pacific plan. He also confirmed a meeting with China's President Xi Jinping at APEC, the first between the two countries' leaders in 3 years. The talks would cover trade, technology, and the global economic system. Each stop sent the same signal. Canada is no longer waiting for Washington's approval. While the U.S. builds walls, Ottawa builds bridges, and much of Asia is ready to meet halfway. By the time Carney wrapped up his press events in Asia, the message had become unmistakable. Trump's trade war, once meant to project American strength, had instead weakened the country's leverage among its closest allies. For Canada, the fallout became an opening. Trump's anger gave Carney the space to present a different kind of leadership, one that combined patience with purpose. By focusing on long-term strategy rather than short-term politics, Canada began to emerge not as a victim of tariffs, but as a model of economic composure. Analysts noted the irony. The U.S. tried to isolate Canada through tariffs, yet ended up isolating itself as Canada deepened ties with Asia and Europe. American firms still rely on Canadian energy, aluminum, and technology components, meaning any prolonged tariff fight hurts U.S. producers first. Carney reminded Canadians that progress had been made, that the door remained open, and that the best response to economic pressure was national resilience. The trade war revealed two opposing philosophies of power. One relies on anger and control, the other builds through stability and quiet confidence. When Trump halted talks, many thought it was a setback for Canada. Weeks later, it proved the opposite. Canada had turned crisis into strategy, using patience as leverage and composure as strength. The lesson is simple. When a trade war becomes a test of leadership, it is not the loudest voice that wins. It is the one that keeps building, even when others walk away.
Let's focus on what we can control. And so, our mission, if you heard the Prime Minister saying it, is to build one strong Canadian economy. And we have everything any country on earth would like to have. And here's the plan. First, we will protect. Second, we will create. And third, we will attract.
Just days after President Donald Trump's high-profile meeting with Prime Minister Mark Carney at the White House, the tone across North America has shifted sharply. Washington was still celebrating its tough stance on trade, but in Toronto, a different kind of power play unfolded. Industry Minister Melanie Joly took the stage before business leaders and investors and announced what she called Canada's path into a new industrial era. The message was subtle but unmistakable. While the United States was tightening borders and raising barriers, Canada was opening doors and rebuilding its economic foundation from within. For years, Canada's economy had been seen as reactive, dependent on U.S. access, vulnerable to external tariffs, and cautious
cautious in industrial investment. But Joly's new plan turned that perception upside down. It was not a speech about waiting for relief from Washington. It was a declaration that Canada would move forward, even if the United States tried to slow it down. Trump's tariffs, meant to squeeze Canadian industries, now appear to have forced the opposite result, a national restructuring that could reshape the continent's balance of economic power.
The first pillar of Joly's plan is to protect. It targets the industries that have suffered most from U.S. tariffs: steel, aluminum, autos, lumber, and copper. These sectors, worth billions of dollars in exports each year, form the backbone of Canadian manufacturing. Rather than plead for exemptions, Ottawa is responding with financial muscle. The government has created a $5 billion strategic response fund to stabilize factories, preserve jobs, and help businesses pivot toward new markets. Each region will receive targeted assistance through federal development agencies, including FedDev Ontario for the Toronto Industrial Corridor. Joly emphasized that Canada cannot rely on foreign markets alone. Future defense procurement, housing projects, and infrastructure spending will prioritize domestic suppliers under the Buy Canadian framework. The goal is clear: build enough demand at home to keep critical industries alive even during trade disruptions. One visible example is Algoma Steel in Sault Ste. Marie. Once tied almost entirely to U.S. auto contracts, the company has now secured new orders from Halifax and Vancouver shipyards as part of Canada's naval expansion. In Quebec, the aluminum producer Alouette has shifted over half of its exports to Europe since the spring of 2025, reducing exposure to the U.S. market. These changes are already redefining Canada's industrial geography. What was meant to isolate Canadian producers is instead anchoring a stronger domestic supply base. When Trump thought tariffs would make Canada bend, they ended up pushing Canada to stand on its own feet.
The second pillar is to create not just jobs, but entire industries. Canada is using the same pressure that once threatened its economy to accelerate transformation. A new defense industrial strategy is at the heart of this effort. Ottawa plans to invest heavily in national security manufacturing, covering everything from submarines and Arctic patrol vessels to satellites and artificial intelligence. Two major contenders, one from Europe and one from South Korea, are competing for submarine contracts, and both will be required to include Canadian suppliers and technology transfers. Shipyards in Halifax, Quebec City, and Vancouver are being modernized to handle a surge of military and civilian construction. At the same time, aerospace manufacturers are expanding partnerships to export surveillance planes and firefighting aircraft. Every new contract is designed to embed Canadian companies deeper into global defense supply chains, not just as subcontractors but as innovators. The same philosophy extends to civilian projects. Through Bill C-5, Canada has simplified its project approval system and already approved 5 major ventures in energy, mining, and transportation, together valued at about $60 billion in private investment. The Darlington Small Modular Reactor project alone will employ 3,000 people, while the high-speed rail line between Toronto and Quebec City aims to connect the country's industrial heartlands. Beyond infrastructure, Joly's message is about scale. Canada wants more national champions, global-sized firms like Bombardier, CGI, and Lululemon that project influence abroad. It is a quiet form of economic nationalism, designed not to close borders, but to build strength that lasts through uncertainty. Trump's trade squeeze pushed Canada to ask hard questions about what it can build for itself. The answer is beginning to emerge: everything from ships and satellites to advanced AI platforms.
The third pillar is to attract talent, investment, and credibility. In a year when the U.S. government has faced a budget shutdown and growing policy volatility, Canada is presenting itself as a place where business can still plan ahead. Ottawa is streamlining permits, reducing regulatory delays, and inviting global investors to relocate operations to Canadian soil. The strategy is not only about money, it is also about people.
Jolie and her team are preparing new programs to draw international researchers, engineers, and students to Canadian universities and innovation hubs. The idea is to turn Canada into a magnet for talent at a time when other countries are restricting visas and tightening academic freedom. This message resonates with investors who are looking to move capital out of unpredictable markets. Canada offers the opposite: steady governance, clear rules, and a track record of honoring commitments. The Canada Pension Plan Investment Board recently reaffirmed that Canada remains among the best destinations worldwide for long-term capital. In essence, Ottawa is using stability as a brand, one that contrasts sharply with Washington's turbulence. When Trump's policies make America seem unpredictable, Canada gains appeal as the calm alternative. When the dust settles, this week may mark a turning point in North American economics. Trump entered his second term promising to restore American dominance through tariffs and leverage. Instead, those same policies are driving his closest trading partner to innovate, diversify, and rebuild from the ground up. The Canadian government is no longer asking for relief or waiting for Washington's approval. It is designing its own industrial future, one rooted in defense technology, sustainable energy, and global partnerships. Trump's surprise may not be about losing a negotiation, but about losing control of the narrative. The tariffs that were supposed to secure American power have ignited a new industrial movement next door. Canada is no longer the quiet neighbor reacting to U.S. pressure. It has become a self-reliant competitor redefining what economic strength means in the 21st century. In a sense, the White House gave Canada the challenge it needed. And while the U.S. debates over trade and partisanship, Canada is already building, ship by ship, job by job, policy by policy, the framework of its next industrial chapter. For Trump, the shock is not that Canada fought back, it's that Canada didn't need to fight at all. It simply grew stronger.